Hello and welcome to another episode of
Atun-Shei Films. Welcome. So we are going to be discussing and test firing some of the most iconic long arms of the American Civil War, specifically that of the United States Army. And I could think of no one else better qualified to help me do that than my good friend Karl of InRangeTV. To that end, we've also dressed up in our most impeccably accurate Civil War impressions. Karl, you've worn a sack coat before.
No.
Only buttoning the top button. Who taught you to do that?
It seemed the right way.
Okay, so we've got a number of Union guns that we're going to be shooting here. And 3 of these actually are originals. So when we say that these are guns that killed racists, we're not kidding.
Yeah, no doubt. So these 3 here in the middle are actually original guns that were made during the war and used in the war. We have a Spencer carbine, a Gallagher, and a Burnside carbine. All of these period correct, original guns firing black powder, proper cartridge ammunition.
So since Karl is an excellent marksman and a consummate expert in all things black powder, he'll be showing me the proper use of these guns, and I will be giving my impressions as a relative novice, plucked right out of a job as a professor in a rural Maine university, and chicken guts thrown on my shoulders and tossed into the battlefield. What are my initial impressions?
So in that regard, this is actually quite realistic, right? And this is representative of a swath of some of the more common ones that were used actually in the war.
Yeah, yeah. But speaking of common arms used in the Civil War, why don't we start with one of the most common of them all, the consummate infantry weapon, the 1861 Springfield.
With rifled musket at half cock, place it upon your left foot. Take 1 paper cartridge from your cartridge box. Tear it with your teeth. Pour the powder down the muzzle. Once all of the powder is in, and make sure it's all in there, you can tear off some of the remaining paper if you need to. Place ball in muzzle. Ram it home with the ramrod. Couple taps, reseat the ramrod. Bring the gun halfway up upon your body. Remove 1 percussion cap from your cap box. Place it on the cone. Bring the gun up for aim. Go to full cock. Fire when ready. All right, so Andy, if you were mustered out to the front, whether it was the Eastern or Western Theater in the infantry, there was a good chance you were going to be issued a rifled musket. And if you're on the Union side, a pretty good chance it was going to be an 1861 Springfield. So what was your first impressions of firing this single-shot muzzle-loading rifled musket?
Pretty negative.
That doesn't surprise me.
Pretty negative.
Yeah.
So one thing it is sort of important to note is we're filming out here in the Sonoran Desert in the middle of July. It is quite hot. Obviously, there would have been pretty similar temperatures, or at least conditions, certainly in the Eastern Theater of the Civil War at the height of summer.
Sure.
Humidity would have been more of a problem,
Absolutely.
but certainly sun and heat would have been a huge problem. So I think it's kind of representative of my experience, which was the gun got very, very hot very, very quickly. And the barrel was hard to actually handle without getting burnt. The paper cartridges, I have more experience firing flintlocks, as you know. So, with flintlocks, you just ram the whole fucking thing in there. And with the Springfield, I found I lost a lot of time just of managing that little paper cartridge and getting the mini ball out, or at least to a point where I could actually seat it in the gun.
On the Confederacy side and on the British side of musketry, they were using, at least at some point, something called the Pritchett cartridge. The Pritchett cartridge is much smaller in diameter and a much better design. It's a cartridge it's not a paper tube, it's a cardboard tube, much more rigid, so it's more durable in the field. The projectile is actually much smaller in diameter, so that it'll always seat. It's already lubricated, and it's got a wooden plug in it that works like a hydraulic press. And so and the bullet's upside down instead of right side up. So when you tore your cartridge, powder, tear the paper off, the bullet's the right direction. The Pritchett, you actually tear the end off, pour the powder in, and it's a cartridge, it's a tube, so it just pours out easily. Then you turn it around, put the bullet in with the paper and all, because it's so much smaller in diameter, and just break the tube off. And in doing that, because it's lubricated and smaller in diameter, it'll seat much easier. There's apocryphal, I can't prove this, but there's apocryphal instances, and I think you could find if you research it, instances in which, at least early in the war, when the Confederacy was using Pritchett cartridges, with a smaller number of men having a higher rate of fire than the Union forces, because the American School of Musketry was kind of the least efficient way to load a gun you could think of in 1861.
Yeah. Fascinating.
I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, obviously it's not the only instance of Confederates being over-lubricated and small in diameter.
Not at all, not at all.
The actual manufacture of this gun is a really fascinating story as well. So these were made in the Springfield Armory of Springfield, Massachusetts, of course, which was it was founded in 1777 and was one of the primary sort of early Republican American armories, the other, of course, being Harper's Ferry, which Karl and I visited together to make our video about John Brown. Since the Springfield factories were publicly rather than privately owned, the United States Army was both the manufacturer and the consumer of the products from this factory. This actually led to like a pretty interesting kind of economic state of affairs. The private arms industry in the United States in the 19th century, which was already heavily subsidized by the American government, basically wanted to create flashy new designs to sell to the Army and to the public at the lowest cost possible. And the results were inconsistent. But because the Springfield Armory wasn't focused on making a profit, they could focus on, first, efficiency of production. And in the early 19th century, this is where, in Springfield, this is where you start to see things like fully mechanized production lines emerge, interchangeable parts emerge.
That means that if you're in the field and you're part of a company, and you've had an engagement that day and all these guns were fired and they're all full of black powder fouling, which will rust, you have to clean them tonight. And that means you all get around and have a big old pot of boiling water. And with interchangeable parts, guess what? It doesn't matter if you take all the stuff off and just all throw it in there, take them out and put it back together. If they're all unique per gun, if your screw, for example, or even barrel band tries to put it on my gun, it won't fit or I have a bigger problem. So that interchangeability of parts, one, accelerates the manufacturing process for the war effort, but also means the man in the field has a much more reliable gun and it's treated much more reasonably for the kind of field maintenance and abuse that they would have otherwise.
So while the federal government's production of guns emphasized uniformity and reliability, most of the carbines carried by primarily cavalry in the United States Army during the Civil War drew from private manufacturers. Now, unlike their government counterparts, private companies produced a dizzying number of variations on the carbine, and the War Department was not discriminating. They bought up them all. So the first one that we're going to be discussing today is the Gallagher.
Gallagher carbine with the gun at half cock. Open the action. Remove one cartridge from your cartridge box. Place it into the breech. Close the action. Cap. Aim. Fire. And that happens.
Misfire.
Misfire. Let's take a new cap. Go to full cock. Get a cap. Attempt again. All right, half cock. Remove the cap. Open the action. Extract and retain the cartridge. Extract and extract the cartridge. Get the cartridge out. You need to get that out, you have to reload. Remove the cartridge. Remove the cartridge. Okay, forget it. Reload. Cap. Aim. Full cock. Fire.
Well, I hit it that time.
You hit it that time. What'd you think?
I think what I thought was pretty self-evident by that footage. Yeah, I thought this gun was kind of a disaster. I mean, it misfired right off the bat.
It did.
And what I think is the failing comment of that model is taking out that fucking cartridge.
The spent cartridge.
Any amount of sweat, and it becomes very, very difficult. Maybe if I had some gloves with some nice good grip, I might be able to do it. But again, with the Arizona heat, which I don't think that the Pennsylvania or Virginia or Mississippi heat would be much more forgiving. And that sweat, plus the humidity, right, of fighting in the American South. I just think that I think I would have been killed almost immediately if I was in any kind of danger whatsoever.
Legitimately, that would have been worse than the humidity because the black powder fouling would be worse. And this was on a clean gun. You had problems extracting that spent cartridge like after the first shot fired. Now, when they issued these guns, they had a couple different types of ammunition. They had one that was foil, they had one paper cartridge one, which might have been better because the paper cartridge would detonate entirely. But really, the vast majority of men were armed with a cartridge very much like you had, which was that metallic brass extruded cartridge that was designed to be reloadable in the field so that when you were done with an engagement, you could go back to camp and you could reload all those cartridges. You can't reload a paper cartridge. Once you fire it, it's gone. But those metallic cartridges were meant, and this is very interesting, to be reloaded when you were back outside of the engagement so you could reload your lot of ammunition without field supply. So that's why those metallic cartridges were the most issued, or generally most used with the Gallagher. But then you have the problem of you can't get the damn thing out after you fire the gun. And it got so bad, in fact, that there were specialized wrenches and tools provided to actually be able to extract the cartridge when it got stuck. So you could have your cartridge box, you'd load your percussion cap, fire, open it, can't get it out, find your wrench, take it, put the wrench, there's even like a rim around, there's a little bit of like a spot milled into the cartridge. That is for the wrench to gain purchase on it to pull it out. And so that was a common problem with the Gallagher. We saw it today with only a few shots fired. It was even more of an issue for the men out there. And there are many accounts of people using the Gallagher and officers saying, this gun is not fit for service. Now, that said, as bad as that is, it's still better than a rifled musket.
Yeah, certainly in terms of rate of fire. Yeah,
even with that problem.
Even with that problem.
And a wrench.
If I had maybe had a wrench, I think I maybe, like if I had spent 10 minutes with the Gallagher, I think I would have been able to get to a much higher rate of fire than with the Springfield.
So if you'd had a wrench with you, you would still take the Gallagher over a rifled musket.
Yeah, I would actually.
But it's still a terrible gun.
Yeah. 2 thumbs down for the Gallagher.
Yeah, no good.
Our next gun is the Burnside, named after its inventor, of course, Ambrose Burnside. This gun comes initially from, appropriately enough, since we're in the desert right now, Burnside's service as a lieutenant in the Mexican-American War. He was stationed in New Mexico, and he thought that the carbines that the cavalry had in the Mexican War were less than ideal. He thought they were horrendous, actually. And in one 1851 journey from New Mexico to Washington, D.C., according to one contemporaneous biographer at least, he spent the entire journey, 17 weeks, coming up with a new design for a sleeker, better carbine. Let's see if all that thinking came up with a good design.
If you hate the gun you're issued with that badly that you're spending that much time thinking about and fantasizing about another one, hopefully he made something good.
Let's find out.
This is the Burnside carbine, the world's most dangerous ice cream cone. At half cock, open the action. Push down on the lever. There you go. Take a cartridge from your cartridge box. Seat it into the chamber. Turn it around, sir. Close it forcefully. Cap. Bring it to aim. Then go to full cock, then aim, fire. Half cock. Don't worry about the cap. Open the action. Extract the cartridge. Put in a new cartridge from your cartridge box. Close the action forcefully. Cap. Aim. Full cock. Fire. So now that we're back from shooting this, the first I'm going to say a couple things. One thing that's most interesting about the Burnside, and I said this in the video, is the world's most dangerous ice cream cone. It's a very unusual cartridge design. And it's also, one of the things that you'll see with all of the Civil War carbines was an attempt to gas seal the action. Meaning that when you fire the gun, you not only you retain all the gases for the projectile's velocity, but you also retain all the gases so that the gun's actually not dangerous to the person shooting it. So with the Gallagher, which is the one that we hated, it did a good job with that. It's actually very well sealed. The Burnside on the other side is actually very poorly sealed, and gas leaks out the top and the bottom quite a bit. So you're losing some of the power that you would get from the powder. And if you held it in the wrong way, you'll actually get burned. But at the same time, I think you're going to say you liked it quite a bit better anyway.
I love this gun.
Okay.
Yeah, I love this gun. This was definitely my favorite of the 3 so far. I got to give it to Ambrose. Not only did he have impeccable taste in facial hair, he had impeccable taste in his carbine design as well. I found this very intuitive. I was getting more shots with it, more hits with it than any of these other guns. If my life were on the line, I would feel pretty comfortable with that.
Well, the Burnside was quite widely fielded, and there's reasons for that. It was an effective design. While it had some gas leakage issues, the reality is it's a reliable gun that's built tough and reliable. I said reliable twice. It's so reliable, I'm going to say it a 4th time. It's a reliable gun. However, what the Burnside didn't have going for it was actually a pretty complex design. And if you look at how it mechanically works, there's more going on there than is necessary. And therefore, that was kind of more expensive as a result. When you open the action, in fact, there's a block that pushes down and the cartridge becomes more exposed for you able to pull it out. And is that important? Yeah. Was it necessary? Not really. And so that kind of stuff, while it's nice, does reduce the speed with which you can manufacture them at the lowest cost possible. That's probably one of the things against the Burnside, but as you noted, in using it, it's really nice.
Yeah.
It is. It's a nice gun.
Yeah,
and it's accurate. Another thing that's very important to the soldier in the field is the ability to maintain and clean it. Because these are black powder weapons, especially in the humidity of the South, it'd only be a few hours before you start getting rust and corrosion. And a rusty, corroded gun is a not functioning gun. The Burnside, while being kind of complex, actually is really simple to maintain. There's like a little lever you turn down here and one screw, and the entire block comes out of the action, and you can clean that separately from the barrel. And then you put it back in, turn the latch, put the screw back in, you're good to go. So that sort of thing really applies as well. And so for the individual soldier, he would have, I can't speak for them because I wasn't there, but I would think as a person still using these guns, I would appreciate, and I would be thankful to Burnside for how well he designed the gun practically to the soldier in mind that's going to have to use it. If you got sideburns, it actually will work even maybe a little better. So since you're fully bearded here, maybe that was something that
I think that adds. I think it actually adds a few points to your roll.
It does. Yeah. It does. Yeah.
Yeah. It's science. The Spencer. This was invented by one Christopher Spencer. It only saw use on the battlefield starting in 1863. Now, the Spencer repeating rifle, same designer, was an early favorite of George Armstrong Custer, which was used at the 5th and 6th Michigan Cavalry in the horrific fighting at East Cavalry Field on the 3rd day of the Battle of Gettysburg. There's kind of a fun story about this gun. About a month after Gettysburg, in August of 1863, Christopher Spencer apparently went to the White House to organize a demonstration of firing this gun with President Abraham Lincoln, the tyrant himself. And so they set up this little target near where the Washington Monument now stands, and Lincoln fired off 7 shots. That board that he shot is still extant, and as you can see here, seems like the president was a pretty fair shot. So let's see if I can get as tight a grouping as the tyrant Lincoln with the Spencer.
This is the Spencer carbine, the best the Union has to offer. This one, however, was acquired by patreon.com/InRangeTV. Put gun on half cock. Remove magazine follower from rear. Retain follower somewhere. Insert 7 rounds into the magazine, bullet facing forward. Replace follower.
Does the Confederacy have easier to use cartridge boxes? Because I'm thinking of defecting.
No, they do not. Cycle action to chamber around. Go to aim, full cock, and then fire. Half cock. Cycle action to chamber fresh round. Aim, full cock, fire. All right, so at this point, now with the Spencer, this is truly the real leap into the future. This is now a gun that has a self-contained cartridge. And what I mean by that is the bullet, the case, the primer, and the powders all in one piece. So everything before this, you would load the cartridge. You'd have a brass cartridge, a bullet, and powder, but you'd have to still put on the percussion cap onto the the cone or the nipple to fire the gun. That was your primer. But with the Spencer, you're talking about a self-contained cartridge. All 7 of those are individual. You don't have to put a cap on. All you got to do is pull the trigger. That should change things a lot, I would think. How did that work out for you?
It did. It changed things quite a bit. I mean, just in terms of rate of fire, it is night and day. Yeah, I think that while I was expecting to like the Spencer. I think I wasn't expecting to like the Burnside, which maybe sort of like is why I was so effusive about it. But I was expecting to like the Spencer, and it did not disappoint. It is a truly sort of 20th century design in a 19th century gun.
So the Spencer saw use in the Civil War, but because of its design and durability and its modern features, this was continued to be used heavily post-Civil War through all of the Old West period.
Yeah, the Spencer was the 19th century,
absolutely,
and in wars all around the world.
Yep.
Well, and as a movie guy as well, one reason that I was particularly looking forward to shooting the Spencer as well was because of its prominent appearance in one of the best westerns ever made, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, which in one of the great anti-violence scenes of cinema, Clint Eastwood's character William Money and Morgan Freeman as his friend Ned kill a teenage boy in the most wretched way you can possibly imagine with a Spencer carbine.
A gut shot with him screaming down there, "Bring me some water."
Give him a drink of water, god damn it.
And it's slow.
Very slow, very slow. Incredible scene.
The magazine itself is actually contained within the stock, which is good for military purposes. You're not going to damage it. The two deficiencies, if there are any, is that you have to cock the hammer every time you want to fire the gun. It doesn't do that automatically. And this, which is the follower for the magazine, is loose and not retained. So when you're putting the cartridges in and you're reloading in combat, this could get lost. And it did get lost.
I could imagine that happening very, very easily.
And if you lost this, you now have a single shot gun. So you'd stick it in your belt or whatever. But those were really the two deficiencies. You got to put this back in and then close it. You have to be very diligent about that. But other than that, the self-contained magazine, a powerful cartridge, self-contained cartridges, repeater, this thing, I understand why this was chosen.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And why it proved so durable and long-lasting after the war.
It's still a cool gun now.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a lot of reasons. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to war with it, but like as a recreational gun or whatever, a field piece, it's still viable. It's not really not. Like, comparing it to like a lot of people still run it with bolt actions, I wouldn't put this in any way deficient to that.
Yeah.
In fact, it holds 7 instead of 5.
So the final United States firearm that we will be shooting today is arguably the most modern, the Henry repeating rifle. One of the most famous times in which it was used was during the Battle of Franklin, when a few hundred United States soldiers on either flank of the army was basically able to hold off a numerically superior Confederate infantry charge by maintaining a very high rate of fire. Although interestingly, I came across one firsthand account by Major General Jacob Cox, who was an eyewitness, who basically said, you know what, yeah, the Henrys did a great job, but we had 2 lines of infantry firing, muzzle loaders. So it's kind of like the whole line might as well have been shooting repeaters, he said. So he was a little skeptical that this made much of a difference in the battle. But even so, if I was carrying this, I would not want to go up against this. I suspect that this is going to be a joy to shoot. So let's do it.
This is the 1860 Henry. This is too good for the Union Army. You will not be issued this. To load, move the follower all the way to the top. Turn to the left.
Back and to the left?
Yep. There you go. Yep. Now, with the gun held almost horizontally to the ground, insert 15 cartridges, bullet facing forward. It's almost like you could load this on Sunday and shoot it all week. Now, carefully, while retaining the follower, turn it to the right and let it down lightly. Letting it go under its own spring pressure can cause these cartridges to detonate. That's bad.
That'd be bad for me.
Aim at the target. Cycling the lever will not only chamber around, it will also cock the hammer. All you have to do is fire. Go ahead, cycle the action.
There we go.
Move your hand in front of the follower, cycle it.
Holy shit.
It's black powder, it gets hot.
Is that it?
Nope.
Damn. Holy crap.
You got more.
Oh, weak. Oh, fucking weak. Ah, God damn. Oh.
It's almost like it'd be better with a wooden handguard.
It's almost as if it would be a lot better with a wooden
Almost like
handguard.
that.
Carl, what the fuck was that, dude? This gun sucks. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it.
All right, fair enough. When Henry designed this gun, he insisted it could not be improved. It was the perfect design. There was nothing wrong with it.
I have a lot to say.
I know you do. It's the reason the Union didn't decide to use it. There's a number of problems, and I think you're going to go ahead and reinforce all this. The cartridge power was insufficient from their terms in terms of being able to take down a horse. They want more powerful cartridge. The Spencer provided that. They didn't want an exposed magazine tube because it could get damaged or get dirt or fouling in it. The Spencer doesn't have that problem either. And if you are using this under stress and you get a little wild with it, it's actually pretty easy to damage. You can actually bend parts and throw it out of what's called time, and that's going to make the gun not function. However, 15 rounds in the gun, and every time you cycle that, it not only chambers around but cocks the hammer, means an extremely high rate of fire. So then why do you hate it?
Well, like you, I like lever guns. I don't nearly have as much experience as you, but when I have shot lever guns, I've enjoyed myself thoroughly. Was really looking forward to this. I was very disappointed. I found the action was not as smooth as other lever guns that I'd fired.
Okay.
It's extremely forward heavy.
And the reason for that is this barrel and this magazine tube is one giant chunk of milled steel.
Yeah, you can really tell. It's very forward heavy. The other thing is, and we can sure feel it now, just being out here in the sun.
We haven't shot this at all. It's just
We
sitting
haven't
here.
shot this at all. This barrel became scorching hot. I have a few red spots on my hand from holding this. Couldn't even get maybe 10 shots off before it became essentially unbearable.
It was already really hot from the ambient heat of our
From
environment.
the ambient heat of our environment, and again, it's I know we're in Arizona, but it's not like Mississippi is going to be any better. And obviously, we're shooting black powder, which is going to make it heat up even more.
I actually can't touch this right now without shooting. We didn't even shoot it, and this is too hot to hold.
Yeah.
Okay, it is. It is too hot to hold. And there's nowhere to put your hand. Like,
That isn't on metal.
essentially, what you have to do is be like this,
Yeah.
and then you
Exactly.
can't cycle the lever.
Yeah.
On top of that, this following your hand, you can cause a malfunction. You have to do what's called the Henry hop and get out of the way of it. Since there's no wooden grip, there's no leverage to cycle the action, which is why it didn't cycle as smoothly as you're used to, because it was hard to get the leverage necessary to do to actually break the knee lock joint in it to actually cycle the action. When you're holding on to something, this is easy. When you're trying to not hold on to this because it's going to burn you, it's not so easy anymore. And it's super interesting that when Winchester was like, hey, we can improve that gun, Henry's like, you can't improve that, it's perfect. And then they came out with the 1866 Winchester a mere 6 years later, which had a wooden handguard
Imagine that.
and a loading gate in the back here called the King's Gate, where you could load it from the rear instead of from the front, and which meant you could also continue to reload from a prone position. But that wooden handguard and the not exposed magazine tube, which also, by the way, was less heavy because it was just a piece of stamped tube versus a piece of milled steel, reduced the weight, provided leverage, guarded your hand from heat, you could reload it from the rear. In 6 years, the unimprovable gun turned into the quintessential 1866 Winchester, which became the 1873 Winchester, one of the guns frequently referred to as the gun that won the West.
This technology was around. It was available. This is 1860, right? Like, it's not even, this is 1863. This is 1860.
Yep.
It was around.
Yep.
So why would not the repeating rifle just be the obvious choice for essentially mass production in the entire United States Army?
Well, I think we can say, you can talk about that in the Civil War, but I think it's actually almost more interesting to talk about after the Civil War. Let's go to the West and the Indian Wars. For lack of a better term, I hate that term, the Indian Wars, which is like a whole bunch of different conflicts, right? And we still see them not issuing a repeating lever action rifle. They issue the Springfield trapdoor rifle, 4570, or even earlier 5070, but eventually 4570. And every time you load, you have to open the action, put in a cartridge, close it, cock the hammer, aim, and fire. Very powerful cartridge, capable of very long range. That's one part of it. But the reality is you had a box full of cartridges, some in your pack, got a pack mule somewhere with some more cartridges, probably. But that whole thing of open it up, put in the cartridge, close it, in theory, aim diligently, fire, means the chance of you outstripping your supply for that conflict is diminished. With this, with all the rounds in the magazine, you get panicked. Even if you're panicked with a trapdoor, it's going to be, you can't go faster. The worst you can do is start dropping cartridges. With this, pop, 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 you're out. And now you're sitting there with a stick. And not only do you're sitting there with a stick, you're in the New Mexico territory. When's your next resupply of 44 Henry rimfire coming in? Probably for a long time, if at all. Same thing existed in the Civil War.
So all these guns were a lot of fun to shoot. I have to admit that research for this video was actually kind of tough. You know, one thing that I really love about your work at InRange, Karl, is that you never lose sight of the human element of the firearms history that you discuss. And while we've talked a lot about the technical aspects of these weapons, I think you've tied it back to the social, the political, the economic in a really insightful way that kind of brings history to life. That's not very typical in military history spaces more broadly, but specifically in terms of the history of firearms, where I always look for the human element, for the individual interpersonal element, and try to illuminate something about the human condition with my videos. Almost all the information that I found about these weapons was the nuts, the bolts, the screws, technical aspects of their design and production, completely divorced from any kind of human or social element.
And I know you've encountered this as well with some of your work, specifically probably the Checkmate Lincolnite series, but people's interests seem to be very much a material culture and a red line on a map that indicates 10,000 dead. And that's it. It's just like a little red arrow or a blue arrow or whatever. And when you're dealing with guns and the topic, because these are weapons, and it is very, very hard to find anything that isn't exactly what you described, like mechanical changes or screw pitch, or the cartridge went from 50-50 to 56-50. But the reality is, for every one of those little lines on a map that has 10,000 next to it, all of those 10,000, whether it's the good guys or the bad guys, was someone's son or daughter, depending on what war or whatever you're talking about. Doesn't matter to them if they were skewered with a spear, shot with a 61 Springfield, a 44 Henry. They died in something that is a human tragedy.
I would humbly submit that if we're not too careful, this cold, dry repeating of essentially trivial minutia can paint a picture of war that is kind of pro-war in a way, because it just inherently sanitizes the violence and glosses over the human dimension, or even the broader political dimension, the industrial dimension, the economic dimension.
The sociological impact is left out of the conversation to fantasize and mentally masturbate about material culture versus the impact of the death and violence that comes from it. But we should not worry about that to the point where we think that all violence has no purpose, because there are times where it is no longer a choice. And I don't want to skew away from that either. So it's a real tough line to walk.
It is a tough line. Yeah, and we've called this video Guns That Killed Racists, and that is a little tongue-in-cheek. It is important to remember, though, that these are the guns that ended slavery.
Yes, and there's an example of that, right? Well, even many of the men that were carrying these were probably deeply racist themselves. Maybe not all of them. Some of them were true abolitionists,
most of them,
but most of them were. But less so than the opposition. And violence was the tool at that time to end a absolutely immoral and unacceptable situation.
To just close out the video, I would like to share a quote from Lieutenant Frank Haskell, who many of you might be familiar with, who wrote very frankly and bluntly about the destruction that guns like these were capable of at the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg.
How look these fields? They were beautiful this morning. They are desolate now, trampled by the countless feet of the combatants, plowed and scored by the shot and shell, the orchards splintered, the fences prostrate, the harvest trodden in the mud. And more dreadful than the sight of all this, thickly strewn over all their length and breadth, are horses, some dead, a mangled heap of carnage, some alive, with a leg shot clear off, or other frightful wounds, appealing to you with an almost more than brute gaze as you pass. And last, but not least numerous, many thousands of men. And there was no rebellion here now. The men of South Carolina were quiet by the side of those of Massachusetts, some composed with upturned faces, sleeping the last sleep, some mutilated and frightful, some wretched, fallen, bathed in blood, survivors still, and unwilling witnesses of the rage of Gettysburg.